Morning, everyone. I hope you all had a great weekend. I hope that special mom in your life had a lovely Mother's Day, whether it be a grandmom or aunt or a sister or a mom herself. Just make sure you tell them how much you love them and you appreciate them. Okay, so this week's lesson is the same pattern as it's been for the last few weeks. The only difference that this is a non-fiction text called Nothing to Envy, Ordinary Lives in North Korea. This is a 7 minute and 37-second text. You're going to listen to it and you can read along as you listen. I will also put the text on the email as well. Don't forget, if you want to email me with any questions, please feel free. We can always set up a video conference with you or a group of students in order to help you be successful. Please reach out to me if you need help with something. Remember, I know you're home, but I'm still your teacher. You can't rely on your parents all the time. They have work to do or they may not know what I want. So please email me or let's have a video conference because that's what I'm here for. All right, without further ado, here is the story. Nothing to Envy, Ordinary Lives in North Korea.
From Chapter 3, The True Believer. The program that got Chang Bo in trouble was an innocuous business report about a shoe factory producing rubber boots for the rainy season. The camera panned over crisply efficient workers on an assembly line where the boots were being produced by the thousands. The narrator raved about the superb quality of the boots and reeled off the impressive production statistics. Ha! If there are so many boots, how come my children never got any? Chang Bo laughed aloud. The words tumbled out of his mouth before he could consider the consequences. Mrs. Song never figured out which neighbor blabbed. Her husband's remark was quickly reported to the head of the Inminban, the neighborhood watchdogs, who in turn passed on the information to the Ministry for the Protection of State Security. This ominously named agency is effectively North Korea's political police. It runs an extensive network of informers. By the accounts of defectors, there is at least one informer for every 50 people, more even than East Germany's notorious Stasi, whose files were pried open after German reunification. Spying on one's countrymen is something of a national pastime. There were the young vigilantes from the Socialist Youth League, like the one who stopped Mrs. Song for not wearing a badge. They also made sure people weren't violating the dress code by wearing blue jeans or T-shirts with Roman writing, considered a capitalist indulgence, or wearing their hair too long. The party issued regular edicts, saying that men shouldn't allow the hair on top of their head to grow longer than 5 centimeters, though an exemption was granted for balding men who were permitted 7 centimeters. If a violation was severe, the offender could be arrested by the Public Standards Police. There were also Kyuch Alde, mobile police units who roamed the streets looking for offenders and had the right to barge into people's houses without notice. They would look for people who used more than their quota of electricity, a light bulb brighter than 40 watts, a hot plate, or a rice cooker. During one of the surprise inspections, one of the neighbors tried to hide their hot plate under a blanket and ended up setting their apartment on fire. The mobile police often dropped in after midnight to see if there were any overnight guests who might have come to visit, without travel permits. It was a serious offense, even if it was just an out-of-town relative, and much worse if the guest happened to be a lover. But it wasn't just the police and the volunteer leagues who did the snooping. Everyone was supposed to be vigilant for subversive behavior and transgressions of the rules. Since the country was too poor and the power supply too unreliable for electronic surveillance, state security relied on human intelligence, snitches. The newspapers would occasionally run feature stories about heroic children who ratted out their parents. To be denounced by a neighbor for bad-mouthing the regime was nothing extraordinary. Chang Bo's interrogation lasted 3 days. The agents yelled and cursed at him, although they never beat him. At least, that's what he told his wife. He claimed afterward that his gift with language helped him talk his way out of the bind. He cited the truth in his defense. I wasn't insulting anybody. I was simply saying that I haven't been able to buy those boots, and I'd like to have some for my family, Chang Bo protested indignantly. He made a convincing case. He was a commanding figure with his potbelly and his stern expression. He looked like the epitome of a Workers' Party official. The political police in the end decided not to push the case and released him without charges. When he returned home, he got a tongue lashing from his wife that was almost harsher than the interrogation. It was the worst fight of their marriage. For Mrs. Song, it was not merely that her husband had been disrespectful of the government. For the first time in her life, she felt the stirrings of fear. Her conduct had always been so impeccable and her devotion so genuine that it never occurred to her that she might be vulnerable. "Why did you say such nonsense when there were neighbors in the apartment? Didn't you realize you could have jeopardized everything we have?" she railed at him. In fact, they both realized how lucky they were. If not for Chang Bo's excellent class background and his party membership, he would not have been let off so lightly. It helped, too, that Mrs. Song had, at various times, been head of the Inman band in the building and commanded some respect from the state security officers. Chang Bo's offhand remark was precisely the kind of thing that could result in deportation to a prison camp in the mountains if the offender didn't have a solid position in the community. They had heard of a man who cracked a joke about Kim Jong-il's height and was sent away for life. Mrs. Song personally knew a woman from her factory who was taken away for something she wrote in her diary. At the time, Mrs. Song hadn't felt any pity for the woman. The traitor probably deserved what she got, she'd said to herself. Now she felt embarrassed for having thought such a thing. The incident seemed to blow over. Chastened by the experience, Chang Bo was more careful about what he said outside the family. But his thoughts were running wild. For many years, Chang Bo had been fighting off the doubts that would periodically creep into his consciousness. Now those doubts were gelling into outright disbelief. As a journalist, Chang Bo had more access to information than ordinary people. At the North Hangyong Provincial Broadcasting Company, where he worked, he and his colleagues heard uncensored news reports from the foreign media. It was their job to sanitize it for domestic consumption. Anything positive that happened in capitalist countries, or especially South Korea, which in 1988 hosted the Summer Olympics, was downplayed. Strikes, disasters, riots, murders, elsewhere got plenty of coverage. Chang Bo's job was to report business stories. He toured collective farms, shops, and factories with a notebook and tape recorder, interviewing the managers. Back in the newsroom, he would write his stories in fountain pen, there were no typewriters, about how well the economy was doing. He always put a positive spin on the facts, although he tried to keep them at least plausible. By the time they were edited by his superiors in Pyongyang, however, any glimmer of the truth was gone. Chang Bo knew better than anyone that the supposed triumphs of the North Korean economy were fabrications. He had good reason to scoff at the report about the rubber boots. He had one trusted friend from the radio station who shared his increasing disdain for the regime. When the two of them got together, Chang Bo would open a bottle of Mrs. Song's Nyungju, and after a few drinks, they would let rip their true feelings. "What a bunch of liars," Chang Bo would say in an emphatic tone, taking care just the same not to speak loudly enough for the sound to carry through the thin plaster walls between the apartments. "Crooks, all of them. The son is even worse than the father." Oh-Ki eavesdropped on her father and his friend. She nodded quietly in agreement. When her father noticed, he at first tried to shoo her away. Eventually he gave up. Swearing her to secrecy, he took her into his confidence. He told her that Kim Il-sung was not the anti-Japanese resistance fighter he claimed to be, so much as a puppet of the Soviet Union. He told her that South Korea was now among the richest countries in Asia. Even ordinary working people owned their own cars. Communism, he reported, was proving a failure as an economic system. China and the Soviet Union were now embracing capitalism. Father and daughter would talk for hours, always taking care to keep their voices at a whisper in case a neighbor was snooping around. And, at such times, they always made sure that Mrs. Song, the true believer, was not at home.